Thank you for being here. My name is Diane Bruxvoort. I'm the Dean of Libraries at the University of North Texas, and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel today. We have three speakers. It's time in this last session of the program to turn our attention to the library user. We have three speakers to help us as we consider transformations in services, spaces, and research. Huge decisions. Where do we start? So I'm going to introduce the three speakers of our panel, and then we're going to have our three presentations. We're going to take questions on those presentations, and then we're going to flip it. We have a few questions that we'll pose to each other and to you, so we can have some discussion. So let me start with introductions. Elliot Felix is a student success author, speaker, and consultant to more than 100 colleges and universities. He is a partner at the global engineering and consulting firm Burrow Happold, where he leads the higher education advisory practice. Marianne Mavrinac, who I think is known to a few of you, is the Neely Dean Emeritus, University of Rochester Libraries, where she served as Vice Provost and Dean from 2012 to 2022. Since, she's been consulting in the area of strategic space planning, contributing to the profession through mentoring, coaching, and community and professional service, and making sure she has ample time to ski and hike. Megan Waters, on the end, became the leader of Los Alamos National Laboratory Research Library in 2018 and has worked to reimagine the role of the National Laboratory ever since. The library has recently transformed into an agile organization using that framework for all things technical and non-technical, which I think could be really interesting. So we're going to start with Elliot.
Okay, great. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate the chance to contribute, and I contribute as a lover of libraries, a lover of alliteration as well. And I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of libraries over the years, a lot of universities, a lot of colleges. And I think my love for libraries started at an early age, but it really came together about 20 years ago up the street. My master's thesis was a new kind of branch library for the New York City subway. And that was a real treat to work on, and kicked off a lot of work with a lot of libraries, really trying to enable student success, helping students feel a sense of belonging, find support, see how and connect their classes to a career, and do that with four S's, right? Strategy or strategic planning, space, services, and staffing. And today I want to help you think through how to change the services and the staffing in lockstep with the space as you're thinking about your users and your staff. I think the playbook on space transformation is pretty well written, and where I feel like I can do my part is helping folks think about their services and their staffing at the same time to be more user-centered and to be more productive and engaging for their staff. So we'll go through 10 steps. I'll use some examples along the way. And each step, you can't talk to a room full of library leaders without offering some reference material. Each slide has a reference you can click on. I guess you could kick on them too, but there's a QR code to get the slides at the end. I'm sure you'll get them otherwise too. But I think this process of service and staff and space transformation, it really starts with a look inside the organization and to your users. So understanding your users and your staff together. And I know corporate references are sometimes anathema in higher ed, but I'm still quite taken and a big fan of the Richard Branson notion that you don't put your customers first, you put your people first, and then they take care of your customers. Happy staff, happy students, happy faculty. You can use the same kinds of processes to think about your students and your staff and your faculty, whether they're surveys or town hall meetings or workshops. From those things, you can create personas for users and staff that embody their needs and help you figure out how to meet them. You can think about the key moments together for users and staff. I think for Georgia Tech, on a project to help them think about how learning and research were changing, we really focused in on these key moments in the user journey, and it was really interesting to discover actually that discovery was something the library was really good at, but creating things and then finding ways to showcasing it, those were opportunities for growth. And once you do that look inside you want to combine it. So this is step 2 if you're following along. You want to combine it with a look outside, look at the trends, look at the benchmarks. And I think we've been discussing this with the ARL staff survey. This is actually work with ARL data, thank you, ARL, and pulling it out of PDFs. So I too look forward to an interactive format. But that external look where you're looking at the trends, you're looking at the benchmarks, I think it's important to not use that in a prescriptive way. Hey, let's be average. But I think it's good. I think it's like the fastest way to be average. I think, and averages are really dangerous. I always tell people, combined, Michael Jordan and I averaged 3 NBA championships. I'm like as good as LeBron practically. So I think be careful with benchmarking, but it can set the context. And sometimes it doesn't reveal earth-shattering insights, but sometimes it does. And this was a case where we worked with a library. We took ARL data, normalized it on a per-student basis, and it's really interesting because the average budget per student they were right on par, but they had the most books, the fewest circs of those books, the fewest seats, and the fewest visits. So it made and the fewest ref transactions per student, I think, are among. So it made a pretty clear case, okay, we have to shift resources from stacks to staff and support services. Sometimes it jumps off the page. Once you've done that internal and external look, then you can think about setting some goals and identifying what it is you want to shift. And this is really important because this kind of sets the tone for how you might change your space or your services or your staffing. And in this case with MIT, it was really thinking about, to create a new service model, what are the principles that are going to guide that? For instance, leading with empathy, trying to empower people, and shifting our mindset. We're no longer in the age of about consumption, we're about creation. And then it's time to make those goals real and to make those shifts real. And we find creating a service philosophy is a great way to do that, because you start to reflect on your values, who you are, your strengths, what you do well, what you want to do even better, and start to crystallize that in some kind of philosophy. And for JMU, that was really about, like, how do we catalyze creativity? And then how does that show up? Okay, it's about how we ask questions. It's how we think about, how can we make every interaction an opportunity to learn? You've looked inside, you've looked outside, you've established some goals, some things you want to shift. By the way, when you are thinking about your shifts, a great way to do that, I forgot to mention this, but it's just a Mad Lib activity that I call from to by. From current to future by making this change. And you could do that. You could write that sentence for your collections, for your staffing, for your partnerships, for your space. And that helps you get there and then helps you create a philosophy. But then you need to think about the portfolio of services and programs and events and tools. Think about your offerings. How are you actually going to meet those user needs and those staff needs? We often refer to this as a service portfolio. Sometimes in the IT land, this is referred to as a service catalog. I don't know whether a portfolio or a catalog sounds better, but going with portfolio for now. And that's really a great way to categorize what you offer, and do it with plain English, I think. Call things what your users call them. That's an important way to be user-centered. A good way to make sure you're doing this is, oftentimes people end up naming things after the tool, right? You name something after Canvas or after Blackboard or whatever it is, and then no one knows what that is because they're not using it. It's behind the scenes. Think about plain English categories for your offerings. One of my favorite examples of this was with Chuck at University of Miami for New Learning Commons, and the light bulb moment here was, what if we thought about the competencies we're trying to help students achieve? And we want them to be able to work with data, to conduct research, to write, to create, to communicate, and to do it in a team. And so those became the groups of service offerings. In fact, some of them actually literally translated into space, right? A makerspace, a data lab. And so it was a great way to link the services to the mission and the competencies. Once you have that portfolio of services, then you need to think about who do you partner with to deliver it, right? Because it's not just you, it's how you're working with others. And how do you make it a real partnership and not have like tenants in the library? I think we've all probably seen what I call the library land grab, which is, hey, you're moving collections out. What unrelated function can we stuff into the library? But how do you actually make it like a mission-focused partnership where there's a real benefit to being together? And I've certainly found the best way to think about being together is not in an all or nothing binary kind of thing, but more along a spectrum. So if you think about the scale of dedicated space, maybe there is no dedicated space and they're just visiting, they're doing consults, they're doing workshops. On the other end, maybe they are moving into the library and embedding their operation, or maybe there's something in the middle, like a kind of a satellite presence. And then importantly, in the other axis, how integrated are the operations and the organization? Are you going to have the same system to check out a book and a laptop? Are you going to have the same way to make an appointment with a librarian, with a writing tutor, with a writing consultant, or a peer tutor or a peer mentor? So thinking about the organization, how integrated they are, and you don't always end up where you start. For Temple, the Charles Library, we mapped this all out. We had a great plan. And then toward the 11th hour, the online learning and the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence fell off the map and weren't a good fit, like I think physically or culturally. So you think about the portfolio of services, you think about who to partner with to deliver them, and then you think about like the physical and digital service points where these come together. And this is really something where a lot of times you can't just get smart people in a room thinking hard to figure it out. You actually have to try it out. You have to prototype it. It could be a storyboard, it could be a skit, it could be a one-day mock-up. This is what we did with Adelphi. They were thinking about an integrated service point for circ and tech and reference, and a lot of anxiety, a lot of unknowns. And the way we resolved that was a one-day test. You move some furniture around, print out some signage, test some things out. You increase your knowledge, you decrease your anxiety. You learn a lot of things along the way. You build some momentum, you mitigate the risk. And once you've thought about the services, then you really need to think about the staffing and create a staffing model that aligns with it. We were just talking a lot about staffing from a compensation point of view and a role description point of view. I think what a lot of people get wrong about staffing models is they know how many staff they have by function or department, but not necessarily by service. So people don't think about, okay, to deliver this service, it takes this many people at this level. So if you can capture that for your current state and then think about your future state, and then think about, as was mentioned earlier, what are you going to need to sunset? What are you going to have to stop doing in order to do new things? That can be a great process, and that's what we went through. With NC State, the challenge there was quite specific. How do you open a new 200,000 square foot library with no net new staff, just with 30 or so banked positions and some student workers? So we had to think hard about that, and then we put that process free and online in the Learning Space Toolkit, which is one of the references if you could click on that link right now, that's where it would take you, and it's a pretty useful tool. Once you have the staff, you have the services, especially if you're partnering, that might mean rethinking some processes. A service blueprint is a great way to do that. As you move left to, those are actually the steps in delivering a service. This is not a tool this is quite a common service design tool, but you're thinking through the steps to deliver it, and then what is the user doing? What are the frontline staff doing? What are the behind the scenes folks doing? What systems are supporting them? It's a great way the thing about services is they're pretty intangible. So if you can map it out in a service blueprint or something like this, it helps you think through it. That's what we did. Emory, as part of a master plan a while back in terms of thinking about how to manage their spaces. And finally, rethinking processes, partnering on services. These might lead to organizational changes where you're actually reorganizing your team. And I think you may have come across this, but a lot of library org charts seem to still center on the book. The selection, acquisition, processing of physical materials, and then sort of new functions are bolted on the side. So you've got that, and then you've got your hey, digital scholarship. Where does that fit in? So if you can think about your groups of services and then try and align your groups of people with those groups of services, crazy idea, I know. That can simplify a lot. That's what we did at Miami. We had 6 service areas, and you see there, as I was talking about before, they're written in plain English: create and innovate, access and borrow. And each of those pairs rolled up to an AUL, and then support with administrative services like IT, finance, and HR. So I hope this helps folks think about how to transform services and staffing along with your spaces, And I'm looking forward to, if you go ahead, you've already figured out this is how you download the slides. Good on you. And I'm looking forward to a great conversation.